Welcome to today's presentation, Negotiating the Oil and Gas Lease Lessons from Shark Tank. My name is Alice Hogue, and I'll be your instructor. Well, let's begin with one of my signature Cajun jokes, and I think it's very appropriate for this presentation. So here goes. Boudreaux called the doctor. He said, "Doctor, you got to help me. My wife, she's in labor." And the doctor said, "Now hold on a minute. Now hold on a minute. Now, is this her first child?" And Boudreaux said, "No, you idiot. This is her husband." Now, the reason that is such a good joke for this presentation is that you sort of have to listen between the lines when you're negotiating an oil and gas lease. One of the things about being a landman is they really try to hire people that are people that can interact with people at all levels, all economic levels, all educational levels. So a lot of times you have to be able to listen for what's not being said. So, and also my family is a big fan of this Shark Tank, and I was watching it one day and trying to put together another lease negotiations presentation. I wasn't really satisfied with the one I had, and I realized that everything they were doing on Shark Tank is everything that I want to teach you about negotiations. So we're going to use a lot of examples from Shark Tank. So to begin, let's start with the introduction. So here's what we're going to cover in the introduction. We are going to talk about, first of all, a definition. What is, oh my goodness, my slide's off. Hang on. First of all, what is a negotiation? And then we'll look at things like, okay, I told y'all. All right. And then what I want to do is I want to walk you through the 10 steps of negotiating an oil and gas lease. So this is a lot of stuff the way that I do it when I negotiate a lease, and also some things that I just do when I'm negotiating anything in real life, just some kind of tips that I've learned along the way. So the next thing we're going to go over is common amendments. You need to be prepared for the amendments that they're asking you for, so you can see if it's something that your company is going to be willing to do or not. So we'll go over some of those. We'll definitely cover the pew clause in this presentation because that is one of the big ones. A lot of people want a pew clause in there. And there are depth severance pew clauses. So I want to make sure you understand that. And then I also want to tell you about a lease clause that we hope that lessors don't know about, but I'm going to tell you about. It's called a favored nations clause. We'll go over that clause. And then we'll wrap up with our conclusion. So let's begin with our first slide, and that is a definition of what is lease negotiations. Well, any type of negotiation, according to the AAPL, is what a landman does. They negotiate. They negotiate not only with the landowner, but they also negotiate with other companies when we're talking about things like farm out agreements or joint operating agreements. Now, this process is a bargaining or a negotiation, and it's between the landowner and the oil and gas company, and the result is an executed oil and gas lease. So a lot of times this process is as simple as just handing the lease over to the landowner and then asking them to sign the lease, and they sign the lease right in front of you, and then you give them their draft, and then you go on your merry way. A draft, by the way, is a sort of a check that we give the landowner, and it's a great inducement to get them to sign that oil and gas lease because you leave this, it looks like a check, and you leave that with them and they see the total bonus amount that they're going to get if they sign that lease. So if they don't decide at that moment that they want to lease, what they're going to be doing after you leave is they're going to be looking at the bonus draft, and then they're going to be looking at the lease, and they're going to look at the bonus draft, and then you're going to be looking at the lease. Now, the bonus draft is something that we like to use because it gives us 30 days from the day they put the money in the bank. And in that 30-day period, that gives us time to go and check the title to make sure that these people are the actual owners of the title. There is a movie called Haynesville that I'm going to have you watch, and I think it's a great film because it's all about the Haynesville Shale in Louisiana and about fracking and the impact that it can have on the community. And it's by two mineral owners in Shreveport, Louisiana. So it's a very, I wouldn't say it was pro industry, but I think it's a very balanced approach to the oil and gas industry. Anyway, there is some negotiations that are shown in that film. And I think that the landman in that film does an excellent job. Um, but there is a title issue in that film, and so you'll see this kind of stuff about the draft in action. So a lot of savvy landowners will want a check. They'll say, I don't want a draft. I want something that I can put in my bank and it'll show up tomorrow. But most landowners don't know that. So what we do is we leave them with a draft. That gives us time to go in and do any kind of title work that we think is necessary, especially if it's on a drill site. We want to make sure before we hand over any money that we have good and clean title to it. Let's see. The other thing with a draft, though, is that this lease is executed when it's signed, but also when the draft is deposited in the bank. In fact, they're depositing the draft is more important than the execution of the lease, because that means that there is consideration, that there was an exchange between the lessor and the lessee, and that's what makes a contract legally binding. Now, I have heard this horror story from a student in my class. He was out negotiating for a company. This was, when the Barnett Shale was hot, and you sit down in these people's homes and you look them in the eye and you negotiate this oil and gas lease. And so he was a pretty successful landman. He was getting a lot of these leases signed and leaving them with a bonus draft. But after like a month, the oil and gas company, this was a broker in the field, so it wasn't someone that worked for the company. It was someone that the company hired to go out and lease. They called him and said, hey, by the way, we're not going to fund those leases. So in other words, they weren't going to honor that bonus check. So it was the landman's reputation. I'm sorry, it's thundering here in Spring, Texas. It was the landman's reputation on the line. And that is an option that the oil and gas company has. So you need to be aware of that. You're leaving that draft. It is not a check, but it looks like a check, and it just gives us time to make sure everything is in order. Now, obviously, if the lease is negotiated, the landowner wants to try to get the highest bonus and royalty payment. So I know y'all know this already, but I'm just going to use my pen. So the bonus payment, well, actually I have this on the next slide. The bonus payment, this is an upfront payment. So this is the payment that we leave the draft with the landowner. And the negotiation is a price per acre. So we say, we'll pay you $300 an acre. Then they would take that $300 and multiply it by their total number of acres. And that's the amount that would be on the bonus check. Now, keep in mind that we're paying them on their net acres. Okay. So if someone owns in the Northwest Quarter 160 acres, but they only have a 50% interest, we're going to pay them on 80 acres. Okay, so for example, if this was $300 an acre, this person would get $24,000. Okay, they would not get $50,000 or $48,000 if it was the full. They would get half of what they own or half of the acres because they only own half. So these are called net acres. The gross acres would be this number. And a lot of times on the when the lease comes into the company, there's something called a lease purchase report. And it says what the percent of the lessor's interest is. So you always put on that lease purchase report, it'll ask for the gross acres and you'll say, in this case, 160, and then it'll ask for the net acres, meaning 80 or 50% of that. So that is the bonus amount you're paying. You're not paying on their total acreage, you're paying on their total acreage times their mineral interest. So this price paid per acre, as I said, is a major inducement to execute the oil and gas lease. Again, they'll see that draft, they'll see a check on their kitchen table for $24,000. What do I have to do to get this $24,000? Do I have to work for a whole year if I'm a minimum wage worker? No, all I have to do is sign this oil and gas lease. So it's a pretty compelling argument. One of the great things about being a landman, it is kind of a sales job, but it's kind of like the best sales job. Instead of asking them for money, we give them money. And so it really makes it a really nice negotiation. Now, when an oil and gas company sends a landman out to negotiate oil and gas leases, they'll give them these parameters. They'll say, okay, don't pay any more than this for a bonus payment. Don't pay any more than this for a royalty payment. And don't pay any more and don't have the lease go any longer than this. So the royalty payment, that is an actual percentage of production, a share of the production from that successful well. Now, in the old days, this used to always be a 1/8 royalty. Today, we see a lot of 3/16 royalties and a lot of 1/4 royalties and 1/5 royalties. So these are the different royalty ranges. And it's up to the landowner to negotiate. Now, obviously for the oil and gas company, we want the lower royalty payment. And here's why. If you have an oil and gas lease, okay, and it's a 1/8 lease, for example. Let's see if I can divide this even to, okay, this isn't going to be even, but you'll get the picture. Okay, so in this case, a 1/8 would be right here, and the oil and gas company would get the remaining 7/8. So 1/8 to the royalty owner, and then the remaining 7/8 to the oil and gas company. Now, if you divide 7 by 8, you're going to get a fraction or a decimal of a 0.875. And if you divide this 1 by 8, you're going to get a 0.125. So this is the way to look at this, is that the oil and gas company, for every barrel of oil that's produced, the oil and gas company is getting 87% of it. Okay, and the lessor is getting 12.5% of it. Okay, so the lower the royalty interest is, the higher the interest that the oil and gas company. So for 3/16, for example, that would be like here. This would all be 3/16. So you can see it's slightly bigger than 1/8. Then that would be 3/16 here. And all of this would be the remaining 13/16. Well, this pen is not great. 13/16. So a 3/16 is going to be a 0.1875. And the remainder, the 13/16, is going to be a 0.825. So if the lease is for a 3/16 lease, the oil and gas company is going to get 82.5% of that, and the lessor is going to get 18% of it. Now you see that that's slightly more than the 0.125. It's not 12, it's 18. But the higher the royalty, the lower the amount that the oil and gas company gets. And so they want you to negotiate as low a royalty percentage as you can. One way you do that is you say you want to have a higher bonus or a higher royalty. Well, really, the landowner should say, well, I want both. But if you give them a choice like that, they could say, well, I want a higher bonus or a higher royalty. Usually they'll say they want a higher bonus. I say usually, that's just my experience, because that's money they get right now. The royalty payment isn't going to be coming into their mailbox until the well is drilled and the well is producing. So that could be 6 months from now. So a lot of times if they say, I want a higher bonus payment, you can then go down to the lower, I don't see that many 1/8, but at least to 3/16. And then the term. So the oil and gas company said, and no more than, or no less than, I guess 3 years would be one. I've seen some oil and gas terms for 6 months. Okay. And so 6 months is, they want you to start drilling right away. So these are the parameters that an oil and gas company will give a broker, will give a landman. So now that we know what and so this is what we start with. Now there are other amendments. We're going to go over that. And every clause in the oil and gas lease is negotiable, every single clause. So these are just the top 3 things that you go in when you make your initial offer. So let me give you some steps then for negotiating this oil and gas lease. First of all, you have to do your homework. That means the lease elements webinar that you saw last week, you have to know every single lease clause on that lease. You have to know it cold, because they'll say stuff like, I think this is your discussion question is, what's the Mother Hubbard clause for? I think we should strike the Mother Hubbard clause. You have to know what the Mother Hubbard clause is, first of all, and you have to know why it's important in that lease so that you can explain it to them in a way that they will feel safe having that Mother Hubbard clause in there. So the other thing is that you have to know and understand all the lease amendments. So the different types of lease amendments, the common ones are pretty much the same. People that have higher acreage amounts can negotiate harder. So if someone just has a little 160 acres and they're making all these lease demands, we're probably not going to give in to them. But if they had, the whole section, 640 acres, and we thought there was oil and gas under there, then we're going to accommodate them more. We're going to grant these lease amendments. But generally speaking, the smaller the property, the less negotiating power the landowner has. Now, the next thing is to know the mineral owner. Now, I know I'm not telling you to go out and stalk these people, but you should have, by going through the county records, a little bit of history. So if this is something that was in their family for generations, or if this person has held it for their lifetime, that gives you some information that this owner has leased from an oil and gas company before. So they may be a more sophisticated royalty owner. If you can find out the age of someone, that's always very helpful. I know that would be harder to do, but those are the kind of factors that go into kind of evaluating the mineral owner for negotiation purposes. Okay, so that's step 1, is do your homework, do the preparation, do the research. The next one is to prepare. What the other thing I would do with the mineral owner is I would check my company's records and I would see if this person is currently getting any checks from us. That's going to give me, again, more information about them. It's going to tell me they're maybe a more savvy negotiator. So again, to the extent that you can, try to get to know as much as you can about the mineral owner. Okay, the next step is to prepare. So you know what you're going to go in and say, what your initial offer is. And one of the main things that I want you to realize when you are going and negotiating this is, I don't know if y'all have heard of Stephen Covey. He wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the pieces of advice that he gives in that book is to think win-win. And what he recommends, and you don't have to do this in a lease situation, but he says anytime there is any kind of negotiation, you go in first and you say, okay, let's agree right up front that this is going to be a win-win. And if this agreement is not a winner for you or a winner for me, so that we both feel like we're winners, then we've got no deal. Let's agree on that. Now, a landman is getting paid by the day. So the higher royalty payment that he gets or the lower royalty payment he gets is not gonna, it's not like he gets paid a commission on that. So he really doesn't have any stake in the game. So he really wants to be fair, or she really wants to be fair to that landowner, because it's not coming out of their paycheck, and their company wants them to get that oil and gas lease. Now, that's not to say they won't start low and negotiate up, but the bottom line is the landman is not there to take advantage of the landowner. There's nothing in it for the landman to do, except if he gets a lot of leases, his reputation may be good. But if he has a lot of dissatisfied lessors, his reputation is going to go down. So you can't go in thinking, I'm going to take advantage of these people. I'm going to, do something unscrupulous so that the oil and gas company wins and this poor person doesn't win. You have to go in with the mindset, and it's really easy to do once you see these bonus checks that these people are getting, these royalty payments that these people are getting. It's really easy to negotiate with them because you know that they are going to benefit financially from it. So it's not like any kind of a slick car dealership. Apologize to anyone out there who has relatives that are car dealers, but it's nothing like that. In a car dealership situation, they get a commission on what they pay. So they want to drive that price up so they get paid more. The landman has a flat day rate. It's usually, I think today it's around $300 a day. So what I would do is I would write it down exactly what I'm going to say. What am I going to say when I first go in there? And then practice it. If you can get someone to sit down across from you and practice it, that's going to be very helpful. The next thing you do is you prepare for objections. Now, a broker a lot of times will be hired in the area where they live because it kind of gives them a leg up on any competition. People will know that this person is from our county or whatever, and so he knows the county courthouse, he knows the county clerks, etc. He should also know, though, what the major objections are. If fracking is a big issue, he needs to know what he's going to say when they ask a question about fracking. If water pollution is an issue in that county or state, or if livestock is, you need to get ready for what those objections will be. Now, a lot of times most of these I would prefer that you negotiate in person because you can pick up on a lot of body language. And we'll get into that in a minute. But a lot of times the contact with the mineral owner is by phone. And so let's look then at step 3, which is how do you contact the mineral owner by phone? The first thing I would do is keep in mind that you need to speak with a clear speaking voice. I really try to do that in my webinars, and anytime I speak, I make sure I say the end of the word. I make sure I take my time and speak clearly. If people are older or if they have some kind of a hearing loss, it's going to be really frustrating for them if they can't understand you. So I speak in a clear speaking voice, and I kind of project a little bit. I don't yell at them by any means, but I have people in my family that have mild hearing losses. And so I'm always very careful to articulate, to speak slowly, and to enunciate all my words. Now, this may sound corny, but I also want you to smile when you talk to that owner. Because even though they can't see you smiling, a smile comes across in a phone conversation. So I also want you to smile. Now, all of this is to project confidence. And then the next thing I would do, I would say, my name is so-and-so. I'm with this company. We're interested in leasing. Get to the point quickly. How are you doing today, Mrs. So-and-so? My name is such and such. We've all had that on a sales call, and it just, like, what do you want? Just get to the point. So say your name. I'm with this company. We're interested in leasing from you. And this is the bonus we're willing to pay. This is the lease that the lease, the bonus, the royalty. This should say royalty. I'm sorry. And the term that we're willing to pay. And a lot of times they will just either make a decision over the phone, and you'll say, or sometimes they'll say, okay, I'll call you if I want to do it. And then you try to get them to meet in public. Can I get you can I bring the lease to you, either at your home or at, usually Dairy Queen is a popular place. And that way they feel, safe, and you feel safe. It's another, safety is another issue for landmen, because if you're going out to these people's houses, you never know what's going to happen. I mean, so you always try to meet in a public place. Now, I've done negotiations in people's homes before, so it's not that big a deal, but you always kind of want to keep safety in mind. The next thing we're going to talk about is if you convince that landowner to meet with you, which is really the best way to negotiate this, or at least meet with you to let you hand over the lease, you need to project a professional image. So that means you need to arrive on time. Meet you at the Dairy Queen at 11:30. You need to be there at 11:15 in case those people get there early. You need to dress appropriately. So the uniform, quote unquote, the uniform for most landmen in West Texas is a button-down starched shirt, clean blue jeans, a nice belt, not necessarily a cowboy hat, but clean boots. Now, the reason for that you want to dress appropriately is if this guy showed up to Farmer Joe's house and he was dressed in a three-piece suit, what is the message that Farmer Joe is going to pick up? First of all, he's not going to be comfortable with them. He's going to think he's being judged. So you don't want to dress down too much, but you want to, you don't have to wear a suit and tie either. I had one attorney tell me one time that he had a landman and that he negotiated this lease for the client, and he had his client sign the lease, and the landman was going to come and pick up the lease and hand over the bonus check. And he told me that when the landman came in, he was wearing shorts, a t-shirt, and flip-flops. And he said to me, Alice, I almost didn't give him the lease. It's a sign of respect if you show up dressed like you care. So I think that good grooming is important, and no chewing tobacco. I would just add that. So you want to project as professional an image as you possibly can. All right, so now we've got the phone conversation. Now we get the in-person. So if you are meeting this person in person, you need to set the tone. And that means you need to enter with confidence. So you want to smile, you want to be friendly, you want to stand up straight. And I know I sound like your mother right now, but you want to stand up straight because that projects confidence. The other thing that people are looking for is they're looking for eye contact. Is this person comfortable looking me in the eye? And if they're not comfortable, what are they trying to hide? The other thing is so you always want to look them straight in the eye with a big smile on your face. And the other thing is when you shake hands with them, that's also a sign of confidence. You reach your hand out first. And you need to be careful, though, not to have too limp of a handshake, but also not to have a bone-crushing handshake, especially if you have someone that's an older person. That's going to really hurt their hands. So shaking hands is an indicator to the landowner of the level of confidence that you have in what you're doing. You always want to be polite and respectful. Now, here in the South, that means you say yes, sir, and you say yes, ma'am. Thank you, please. All of that stuff. You need to show that you're very polite and respectful. Now, when you first get there with them, you say, my name is such and such. I'm here with this company. How are y'all doing today? Now, we can go into more of a conversation if we're meeting in public. Not so much on the phone, but in public, we can start it. So how are you guys doing? Okay. Now, this is an excellent opportunity for you to get some information about your competitors. So, something as innocuous as, so are y'all getting a lot of calls from oil and gas companies? That's going to be something they want to brag about. So if they are, then there's a lot of competition in the area. Small talk like that. Have you leased before? Has this property been in your family before? Try to get them to open up and talk about themselves. Now, there's a famous negotiation book called Getting to Yes. And one of the strategies in that book, and take it or leave it, is that the more you get the person you're negotiating with to say yes, the harder it is then to answer no to you. So, have y'all been getting, and so usually you kind of know the answer. Have y'all been getting a lot of calls from other oil and gas companies? Has this been in your family for a number of years? Did you just recently purchase this? You're trying to get them to say yes. And the more yeses you can get from them, they're kind of in the pattern of saying yes. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. Now, proceed with confidence. So here's my Mark Cuban, very confident person. All of those people on Shark Tank, very confident people. And one of the things I have in your materials is a body language analysis of a presentation to the Shark Tank, to the sharks. And so it's going to tell you what all the different how your body language impacts your negotiation. So, for example, if I sit here and talk to you and I have my hands folded across my chest, or the lessor has their hands crossed over their chest, what's the message? The message is, I'm guarded, I don't trust you. Okay, so you need to be able to read that. Another thing I will say about body language is that you need to mirror as much as you can the person that you're speaking to. So, for example, and I mean the energy and I mean the body language. So, I think I'll cover this later. Let me see. Okay, sorry. This is new for me. So you want to mirror their energy level and their body language. So, for example, if I meet someone and they're a very quiet and slow talker, and I come and say, "Hi, I'm Alice Hogue. How are you doing? It's a good day. Oh, it's a beautiful day." And they go, "I'm fine. I'm fine." And you go, "Oh, well, listen, we got the best deal for you. You're going to love this, blah, 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 blah." There's no connection there because you're not mirroring what they are giving you. Same thing if you walk into somebody's house and you're all bubbly and they're quiet and reserved. You need to match your mood to their mood. So if they're quiet and reserved, even if you're a gregarious extrovert, you need to tone it down. It's kind of like when someone says to you, uh, "Oh, there's an emergency, this is happening." And the person says back to you, "Calm down." That's a disconnect. Okay. You also need to think about, well, let me give you this example. If this person is a high energy person and they say, "I'm really angry about this," I'm going to say back to them, "I understand." If it's a slow, calmer kind of person, I don't mean slow mentally, but a more reserved person, he's going to say, "I'm really angry," and I'm going to say, "I understand." Now, it's the same words. It's the exact same words. But what I'm doing is I'm mirroring what they are giving me. So, a lot of what you do is nonverbal. I think there's a statistic that 80% of what people read from you is nonverbal. So, they're looking at things like your smile, your posture, your eye contact, your shaking hands, the way you look, the way you dress. Before you say a word, most people have formed an impression of you. So, you want that to be positive. Now, let's talk about body language. If someone is leaning forward, okay, that means they're interested, they're listening. Okay, so you want to mirror that behavior. If they're leaning forward, you need to lean forward. If they are leaning back in their chair with their arms crossed, you are going to lean back in your chair with your arms crossed. Because here's the thing, if they're leaning back and I'm coming forward, they're going to continue to back away from me. So in order to mirror that, in order to make that connection, if they're leaning back with their arm closed, I am. I am not a threat to you. I'm not coming after you. I'm going to give you what you give me. Let's see, what else would I do? Um, a lot of times if people put their hand like in a steeple position, like here's the church and here's the steeple, it's kind of a way of saying, it's kind of professorial. It looks like you know more than the other person. It comes across as, like you're kind of like a father figure. Um, Hands closed generally means you're not getting through. Hands open, like here, he's starting to open up. He's starting to get through here. So just by their body language alone, you can sort of tell a little bit about what they're thinking. Look at these expressions from Mark Cuban. This is an expression of, I don't believe you. This doesn't make sense to me. This is an expression of, well, this may be making sense to him. He's more open here. Now here, clearly, he does not believe you. You can clearly see that he's got a problem with what you're saying and he's not happy about it. This, very comfortable, very relaxed. Now you're in a good position. If you can get the person that you're negotiating with to laugh, you have a huge connection to that person because everybody likes to laugh and everyone likes to think they're funny. So if you laugh, that's one of the things that I use in my daily life. Any slight joke that anybody gives me, I really laugh at it because it builds that rapport. Here, clearly he's saying, he's leaning back. He's got his eyebrows raised. He's got this look of disbelief. Really, he's kind of saying. And then here, obviously, you've blown the sail because here is his hand on his face. Like, I can't even bear to look at you. So those are some of the body language things that you look for. I'm going to give you some more examples just from Shark Tank. Here, again, if you can get people to laugh, and get comfortable with you, that's going to go a long way for you. This person is listening. So you don't have to oversell, just give them the information that you have. You don't have to be a real aggressive salesperson if you've got a person that's doing this. She's smiling, she's leaning forward, she's got a calm expression on her face. So that's someone in listening mode. So if they're listening, you need to be giving them as much information as they need. Now, clearly here, these people are in disbelief. They don't believe whatever's being said. Her mouth is open. Her eyes are looking up to the ceiling. He's got his hands out. Come on. So those are all clues that you can watch for when you're negotiating an oil and gas lease. This guy right here, he looks like he's kind of mad right here. So someone that's really listening has a face on that's more like Laurie's here. A really kind of a calm disposition. I'm open, I'm listening. Okay, so now we're going to use those lessons from Shark Tank. And the first one is you make the pitch. Now, it's not going to be as formal as it is on Shark Tank. I don't know if y'all know who this is. This is Dr. Heinz Doofenshmirtz. He's from a cartoon that my daughter loves. It's the silliest thing you ever saw, Phineas and Ferb. And he always has some kind of annihilator or some kind of innator. So this is his invention to pick his daughter up from school and get her home. This thing picks her up and shoots her home. So we're going to use that as an example just because I'm going to try to get you to laugh. And so let's go through this. So the first thing they do is they say, they give their name. My name is such and such, and I am here to show you blah, 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 blah. Now we're just on Shark Tank right now. Okay, so now let's switch back to the oil and gas lease. Well, my name is Alice Hogue, as you know, and I'm from this oil and gas company, and we'd like to make an offer to you to lease your oil and gas from us. We'd like to give you this bonus check. Now I'm giving them the check, and they're going to look at that number on there. Now you may not have negotiated the lease yet, but you could say I'm paying $300 an acre, and there the check is all made out for them. Now they could say, well, I want $500. Well, then you would take your bonus back and bring them another bonus. But having it already written out kind of reinforces your position that this is what our offer is. And then, in Shark Tank, they say, we are asking for your signature in exchange for a bonus payment of this and a royalty fraction of Y and an X term year. Do we have a deal? That's what they say on Shark Tank. So this is called defining the deal. So this is what we're offering you, Mrs. Jones. We're offering you a $300 an acre bonus. We're offering you a 3/16 royalty, and we're offering you a 3-year term. Now, I don't know that I would say, do we have a deal at this point? But you could, if you were comfortable, you could say, you know what, I think I would say that. So, do we have a deal? Well, the next thing they're going to do is they are going to say, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. And they're going to start saying, well, I don't know. And this is really key information, is to understand, first of all, listen to what their objections are, and then rephrase that objection to ensure they understand. A lot of the problem that people have with listening is they don't feel like they've been heard. And so if they say, well, this is my concern, and you say, well, yeah, but that's not going to happen, because that person's not going to feel like you really heard them. They are going to be thinking that all you were doing when they were talking was preparing your response. So I would listen for objections, and then I would rephrase it. So, for example, they might say, well, I don't know, I've heard a lot about water pollution with oil and gas fracking. I would say, so you've heard that there's a lot of water pollution in oil and gas fraction. So you're concerned about whether or not to sign this lease. Is that right? That person now feels heard and they feel validated. You have not agreed with them that fracking contaminates the water, but they feel like they have been heard. Now, the next thing I would do, instead of launching into my counter argument about why fracking does not harm the water table, I would ask them questions. The more questions you can ask, the better you are at handling their objections. So, what is it about the water quality? Is it the contamination from the water table, or what specifically are you concerned about with the water? Well, they could say, I'm either concerned about the water table and what it does to it, or they could say, I'm worried about the amount of salt disposal wells, that, the amount of water that is used in this area. We're in a drought area. So you could have gone off on your own tangent about fracking and the water table and how many feet below and casing, and their main concern is about how much water you're going to use when you're drilling the well. So you want to ask the questions to clarify, well, what is it specifically? And then always, always, always keep your emotions in check. You never want to lose your temper. You never want to in any way show that you're frustrated or upset by them. You are like a Zen person when you go in there. You're very calm. You don't have a stake in this game. Your commission does not depend on what this negotiation comes out. So you're really a pretty calm person. Now in Haynesville, they have an excellent negotiation, and that's what that guy was like. It's not a hard sell. It's not an aggressive sell. It's more like a conversation. The negotiation is more like a conversation. You want to watch their body language when they're saying what their objections are. Look at this guy. What is he saying here? Does he believe in the sales pitch that's being given him? No. He's kind of got a look of disgust on his face. He's got a little bit of anger on his face. So you want to avoid your lessor from getting to this stage. Here again, we want to keep emotions in check. He's saying, stop, stop. And look at this guy. He's got his brows furrowed. He's leaning back. He's got his hand on his cheek. He is confused. He doesn't believe what's being said. There's a credibility issue. So all that stuff that you can get just by looking at them, just by watching how they react. So the next thing that happens is, once they have their objections heard, then you want to hear their counteroffer. So they may say, I want to make sure that we put a clause in there that says that salt water can't be disposed on our property, or a clause in there that says there's not going to be any use of the surface, so our water table will not be contaminated. Okay. Now, if you have the authority, you at that point could accept that counteroffer. The oil and gas company is really interested in the financial side of it. So a lot of these things that they want, even some surface use restrictions, the oil and gas company is going to be willing to give them. So there are things like like with the water quality, I lost my train of thought. Doggone it. Oh yeah, so they're not concerned about a lot of these little amendments that are a concern for the lessor. So it's a lot of time really easy for the oil and gas company to say, okay, that's fine, we can put a clause like that in there. Now, if you do give in that way, you could say, okay, yeah, we can do that, but will you be willing to do this? So you never give something without getting something in return. So if you're negotiating about the bonus payment and you're negotiating about this clause, you say, I tell you what, we'll put this clause in here if you will give us, this lesser fraction or whatever it is. You try to get some kind of something in return. Now, if you're reading their body language and they're really mad, I don't know that I would do that. But as a general rule, you don't want to give anything without getting something in return. And that's what people expect in a negotiation. The other things that you might want to do is limit your authority. If they're asking for something that's either too high or something that you don't think you have, even if you, in other words, even if you do have the authority. Let's say your oil and gas company says you have the right to go all the way up to a 25% royalty. And everyone else you've been leasing has been a 3/16 royalty. So if they say, well, I want a 1/4 royalty, one thing you could say is, well, I'm going to have to get approval for that. Now, that may or may not be true, but they realize if I want this check today, then this is the person that I need to negotiate. If he doesn't have the authority to go up to 25%, then maybe I'm just going to stick with the 3/16 that he's offered me. And then you want to overcome any objections that they have. If you know what's going on in this area, you're going to know what those objections are. The other thing that's helpful is a time frame. I'm going to leave this check with you or this bonus with you and this lease. If you could have it back to me no later than Friday at 3 p.m. Now, if they go past the 3 p.m., it's not a big deal, but you want them to make the decision quicker rather than, drawing it all out. Yeah, that's the other thing about the bonus draft too, is if they go past 30 days, the bonus draft expires. So you want to give them a time frame. If you could get this back to me or get an answer back to me at this time on this date. Another technique in a counter offer is to say, as I said, an either or kind of thing. So would you rather have a higher bonus or a higher royalty? Well, as I said before, they want both. But if you give it to them that way, a lot of times they'll pick one, and that helps with making you look like a better negotiator. Well, it makes you a better negotiator. Okay, now let's look at the ask. This is when you ask, do we have a deal? You may remember when you go to a car dealership, what they will say is, what would it take you to get you to sign this car today? Well, people have heard that phrase before, and that makes them uncomfortable. But along those lines, one of the things I say is, what's your main concern? Because the more I can get them to talk, the more I can counter it. And if I address their main concern, the more likely it is that the negotiation is going to do well. Okay, so not what would you take? So will you sign this oil and gas lease? So are you interested in leasing from us today? You don't have to say today, but are you interested in leasing with us? So are these terms satisfactory? Do we have a deal? Those are the kind of things you would say to close or to ask for it. So that's called the ask. Now the next step is you've asked for their business. Now you're going to get a yes or a no answer. This is called the close. The most important thing about the close is that you don't rush it. You answer their questions, but if they're sitting there looking like Barbara here is, Barbara is totally engaged. She is making eye contact. She's looking. She is thinking about this. So if you see this kind of a look on their face, then you stop selling, because you've already given them all the information that they need to make a decision. Now let it go around in their brain. if at this point I see Barbara making this kind of face and I say, okay, Barbara, again, the 1/4 royalty, 3/16, this is going to be the best deal. You're going to be really happy. She's going to say, oh, well, is it the best deal? Because, I mean, what are my neighbors getting? What are the other people getting? You were that close to having her sign, but because you were uncomfortable with the silence, you blew the deal. So once they get to this place, they are going to have to be quiet and think about your offer. Now, it's uncomfortable for us. It's uncomfortable for people like me that, like to be extroverts, but that's what you have to do. Once they get to this point, you stop talking. It's as simple as that. Now, whether they agree to lease at that moment or whether they agree to lease later, you want to finish strong. So step 10 is to finish strong. And a lot of this is the same way that you came in. First of all, you're going to leave the draft for them. This draft expires in 30 days. Here's my business card. The next thing that is going to happen is that I will call you tomorrow, or you will sign this lease and call me, whatever it is. And then you finish just like you came in. You shake hands, again, firm, but not limp, not bone crushing. You're going to have your posture held high and then thank them for their time. The whole goal here is to look like you won. Even though you may not have had them sign the lease yet, it's sort of like, this is not a big deal to me. This is something I do every day, and whatever decision you make, I'm confident will be the good decision. So that's what this finish strong is. Good posture, hold your head up high. You never want to look defeated. You never want to look disappointed that you didn't get the lease, because to you, what you're trying to project is this confidence, and really they're not taking any money out of your wallet. And so you're good with whatever happens. You shake hands, you're polite, you have good posture, and you thank them for their time. Now, if they say yes, a common mistake that is made is that if you look exuberant when they say yes. I saw an example of this. There was a jeweler, and he was selling this really expensive piece of jewelry. Any of you that have been in a jewelry store, they'll just take the ring out of it. Oh, this is $50,000, and then just lay it on the table like, hey, everybody's got $50,000, right? So that's sort of the tone. If they say, yeah, I'll take, then you go, yes, that's going to indicate to them, maybe I left money on the table. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. So you just want to say, okay, that's fine. And here's this and here's that. So the mistake that a jeweler could make is the same thing. You buy this $50,000 ring and they say, I'm so happy. This is the biggest deal I've ever made. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. This is a great deal. Now they're thinking, I think I'm being taken advantage of. So whether they say yes or whether they say no, you're as calm as a cucumber. As cool as a cucumber. So finish strong, you're confident, you're going to go on to the next lessor and they're going to finish. So, these people aren't making or breaking your day, but you hope that they have a good day. Now, I want to go over just a couple more pieces of advice before we get into the amendments. And one is if you're negotiating with a couple. Now, first of all, you need to be aware of gender issues. Now, by that, I mean, if I am a woman landman and I am negotiating with a couple and I spend most of my time making eye contact with the man, the woman may start getting upset with me. So you need to be prepared for whatever the opposite gender is. If you are a man and you focus on the woman, the man's going to say, what's going on here? So you have to be very careful to strike a balance between the two of them so that they both feel like their opinions are important and their opinions matter. Same thing, be polite and respectful, especially if it's an older couple. You want to say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir. You want to be as calm and gentle as they are calm and gentle. Same thing with the body language. If they're calm, moving slowly, you don't have to shuffle behind them. And by the way, all this mirroring body language, you don't want it to look like you're mocking them. You're trying to do this in a subtle way. So then watch for subtle clues between the parties. Think about the jeweler again. you've got this ring out and you can tell they're thinking about it, and the wife is looking at the husband, just slightly looking to his side with a kind of a pleading look in his eyes. Now you know she's on board. Now, so the next piece of advice is that when you're dealing with a couple, if you've got someone that agrees and the other person doesn't agree, I start speaking exclusively to the person that does agree. I don't spend my time trying to convince the person that doesn't agree. Once one of them agrees, I zero in on that person and I answer all their questions, and I am really talking only to them. Because if I can convince that person, this spouse in this example, she's going to convince him. She is in a position to influence him, more of a position than you are. So if I can get her to yes, then she'll get him to yes. So when you're negotiating with a couple, that's called divide and conquer. Don't do it unless you know which side you're, if that someone has made a decision. You don't want to just zero in on whoever the opposite sex is and make them uncomfortable. But once you know that someone is saying yes, for example, the jeweler store, the wife is looking at the husband and saying, I really think we should get this. I really think we should get this. And he's saying, well, I don't know. I mean, it's $50,000. I mean, that's a lot of money. She goes, I know, but you remember you got that bonus last week and da, 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 da. The jeweler has stopped negotiating. The wife is now going to convince the husband, or the husband is now going to convince the wife. So that is a tip for negotiating with couples. That background sound is the rain beating against my window. So now let's go over some common amendments. Now, the most common amendment is what's called the Pew Clause. And it's easy to remember because oil and gas companies think it stinks. Now, give you a little bit of history. It was invented by a Louisiana attorney named Lawrence Pugh, P-U-G-H. And what Lawrence Pugh believed was that he had a lot of people that had an oil and gas lease. Okay. And they pooled that person's lease with a lot of other people's leases. Okay. Oh, let me do this. So if I drill a well at this point, that's going to hold the entire lease. Okay. So they're going to get paid from that entire lease. But if I drill a well here, if I drill a well over here, and I put a unit over here, this is going to be within the unit, and this part is without of the unit. The landowner is only going to be paid on what is in the unit. So it's the loudest rain I've ever heard. So in other words, it says if you have a lease and part of the lease is in the unit and part of the lease is outside of the unit, you have to release the part that's outside of the unit, because they're really not getting a payment on anything here. They're not getting a payment, and yet they still don't have the right to lease it to someone else. So they put a Pew clause in there that basically modifies the pooling clause. And it says, in the event a portion or portions of the lease premises is pooled or unitized with other land so as to form a pooled unit or units, operations on, completion of a well upon, or production from such unit or units will not maintain this lease in force as to that portion of the lease not included in such unit or units. Now, there's also a, hold on one second. The wind blew open the front door, so I had to stop it from getting the house wet. Okay, so that is what we call a Pew clause. Now, there's different types of Pew clause. There's a horizontal Pew clause and a vertical Pew clause. Now, a lot of people have had arguments with me about which one is horizontal, which is the surface side of it, or which one is vertical. Well, I say it's the surface side of it. Some people say this is the surface and this is the depth. And then some people say, no, this is the depth and this is the surface. So what I'm going to call this is a depth pew and a surface pew. So this would be considered a surface pew. Happens on the physical acreage itself. A depth pew would be you drill so many to whatever formation, and then you have to release everything below that formation. So that is the depth clause. So you can drill up to here, but all these other formations that you're not producing from, you don't have the right to produce from there. So they only have as far as they drill to. And it reads, it is understood and agreed that 1 year after the expiration of the primary term of this lease, upon the expiration of an extension or renewal, or after cessation of operations as provided herein, whichever occurs last, lessee shall release all rights lying below the stratigraphic equivalent of 100 feet below the base of the deepest producing formation in any well drilled on the lease premises or on lands with which the lease premises has been pooled. So that is the depth pew clause. Now I want to talk to you about this secret clause that we don't want our landowners to know about, and it's called the favored nations clause. Now, what it does is it basically says, okay, oil and gas company, if you pay anyone a higher bonus or a higher royalty in this area, then you have to come back to us and make us even with that higher bonus or the higher royalty. It's called the favored nations clause. Whatever anyone is getting out there, you are basically guaranteeing that I'm going to get the same rate. Now, this will only work if the person has a lot of acreage. Oil and gas companies do not want to have to include this on an oil and gas lease because they're constantly going to be in jeopardy of losing the lease. So let me see, where is that language in here? Then the lessee shall pay to lessor an additional bonus for this lease, an amount equal to the difference on a per acre basis. Lessee's failure to perform these obligations provided for in this provision of the date to give the greater bonus is paid or a greater is provided for in the other lease, this lease shall automatically terminate. So this is an automatic termination clause. If they don't give you the higher amount, if you don't give them the higher amount within a given period of time. So that's the only feature in an oil and gas lease that is automatic termination except for the delay rental. So we really don't like this provision, but I wanted you to be aware of it in case your family has minerals, y'all can negotiate this. Or if it comes up, how you're going to handle it. Again, a lot depends on their negotiation power, which is the number of acres that they have. Okay, just a few more amendments. One is that they strike the warranty clause. There is a clause in the oil and gas lease that basically says lessor hereby grants and hereby warrants title to the said land. Well, a lot of landowners will cross through that and they'll say, I'm not guaranteeing anything. You hired the attorneys. You had the landman run the chain of title. You know my title better than I know my title. So I'm going to strike through that. And if you guys made a mistake, that's on you. It's not on me. Another thing that they're really concerned about is, especially if it's on their property, is where are the flow lines going to go? Where are you going to put the equipment? Another provision that they might put in there is consent to assign or notice to assign. A lot of times we've got a broker in the field who's working undercover. And he does not say, I'm working for Exxon, I'm working for Anadarko. He just says, I'm working for Landowner Services or, Brokers Incorporated. So they might want to put, let's say someone had a bad experience with Exxon and they said, okay, I'll sign this with you, but you need to get my consent before you assign it to anybody else. So that is a consent to assign. That's a huge pain in the derriere. And so we really try not to get their permit, we really try to have that just included in the lease. So this is really a very onerous provision for us. The next one is notice to assign. You don't have to get my permission, but you have to let me know. Again, that one's still kind of onerous because now we've got to go back and figure out, when the lease is assigned. So that is, we really don't like to put these in there. Next is environmental. So a lot of people will say, I want a clause in there that says my water table will be protected. And if it's not protected, you agree to pay me so much money in damages. That is fine. We are perfectly willing to pay those kinds of costs because we don't really believe fracking causes that. So yeah, put that in your clause. Get yourself comfortable that that's not going to happen. And that's also what the negotiation is in the Haynesville movie. Okay, just a couple of other ones. One is, to beautify the area. Um, First, they say they're going to pay so much money for crops. Then here's where I want the well to be put. I want the equipment put over here. These are all things that they can have in their lease. Here's where I want the pipelines and flow lines. I want you to paint the tanks. Okay, so you see how unattractive this is. A lot of times they'll put in there, you want to paint the tanks and you want to keep the landscaping low around it. So these weeds that are growing that just make it unsightly. Now, you don't have to go to this extreme, where you paint it red, white, and blue and show your patriotism. But notice the difference in how much better this looks. And look, there's no landscaping around it or anything. So those are the other kinds of amendments you'll get. And then water usage. You can only use water from this area. Water usage issues. And then cattle guards. Cattle guards are these bars. I don't know if y'all have seen them before, but they're bars that you put across a crossing. So you have an area where the cow is going to go from this field to this field. If you put these bars, these metal bars, they look kind of like this, but they're really close together. The cows are afraid of it, and so they won't cross over it. So a lot of times they'll say, put cattle guards up to protect our cattle from going there or, getting contaminated in some way. That's an easy fix. We don't have any problem doing that. All right, so let's look at what we talked about today. And we began with an introduction to lease negotiations. And then I walked you through the 10 steps of lease negotiations. And then we walked through some common amendments that you'll see come up and how onerous it is perceived by the oil and gas company. And then that wraps up this presentation. Are there any questions about what we've covered today? Any questions? There's a question box that you can use if you have questions, or you can use the chat box. Well, I must have done a very good job of explaining this. No, I'm just kidding. Really, anytime you have a question, I'm not offended at all. But, you can always reach out and contact me. All right. Well, y'all have been a great audience, and I thank you for coming out to the webinar, and I will see you next time. Signing off.